This is one of my favorite topics that I've covered in the past, new house stories in which unsuspecting people who just moved into their new homes discover something or perhaps someone that shouldn't be there. But before getting into those, I want to thank DraftKings for sponsoring this video. DraftKings is an online real money casino that lets you play whenever and wherever legally permitted. DraftKings is an industry leader with a variety of popular slots games, exclusive DraftKings games, and live dealer table games. With the holidays around the corner, DraftKings can be your home casino for the holidays, with your favorite real money casino games right at your fingertips in the comfort of your living room by the Christmas tree and fireplace. Choose from over 300 real money games, slots, blackjack, roulette, and live dealer games, with more real money games added regularly. DraftKings Casino is changing the game with new ways to play. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable. And if it's not yet available in your state, check out DraftKings Daily Fantasy app, where you have a shot at winning cash prizes all season long. Head to the DraftKings Casino app right now and sign up using promo code Mr. Nightmare. And when you play just $10, you'll instantly receive $100 in casino credits. This happened a few years ago, but it still gives me an unsettling feeling whenever I think about it. The only reason I'm talking about it now is because I feel like it's been long enough since it happened, and I won't risk anything by putting it on the internet. Back then, my wife and I had just moved into the suburbs from the city. We just had our third kid, and between the baby stuff, the toys, and the general chaos, our apartment felt way too cramped. We found a nice house in a quiet, safe neighborhood. The neighbors described it as the kind of place where you'd feel fine leaving the doors unlocked. The house itself wasn't massive, but it was definitely a step up from the tiny space we'd previously been living in. One of the features that caught my wife's eye was the backyard. It had this beautiful, slightly overgrown garden with a few old statues scattered around. They were weathered, a little eerie, looking like something out of Game of Thrones. I know it sounds weird, but my wife and I loved it, said it gave our yard character. I was pretty indifferent, so I left everything as it was, statues and all. I figured it was less work for me, which I was never going to complain about. A few days after we moved in, I was looking out the window, taking in the yard, when I noticed something odd. One of the statues, an angel, I think, was facing away from the house. All the others were facing toward us, so it looked strange. I could have sworn they all faced the same direction, but I didn't really know for sure. I didn't think much of it and just assumed I was misremembering things. The next morning, I looked out the window again, and that's when I noticed it. Another statue had turned around, again facing away from the house. This time I knew something was up. I had never been more sure about anything in my life. I asked my wife about it, but she just shrugged it off and said she hadn't noticed anything. I thought maybe it was my son Jimmy. He was a little prankster back then, always up to something, but when I asked him, he just looked at me like I was nuts. I doubted he'd do something like that anyway. I knew something was going on though, but I couldn't prove it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I tried to ignore it. Besides, I had bigger problems to worry about. I don't like admitting it, but money was really tight during that time, and I lived in perpetual fear that I was going to lose my job. A few days went by without anything strange, and I started to relax, but then one evening I looked out the window and my heart nearly stopped. All of the statues were lined up in a row at the very edge of the house, just standing there. It was a freakish sight, like something out of a horror movie. I know it sounds ridiculous, but part of me could feel all those eyes looking at me. My breathing went shallow. I couldn't decide whether it was more scary or bizarre. I went outside to get a closer look, trying to make sense of it. Before opening up the back door, I took a few nervous glances around the yard to make sure there was no one out there. It was daylight, but I was paranoid. Eventually, I worked up the courage to open the door and go inspect the statues. I went to lift one of them and immediately realized something. Those statues were heavy, way too heavy for one person to move alone. I couldn't even budge one of them on my own. As I was debating what to do, my wife came outside, and the look on her face told me she was just as freaked out as I was. She suggested maybe some of the other neighbors were messing with us, trying to scare the new people on the block. But that explanation literally made no sense. We had met all of the neighbors, and they all seemed like fairly normal people. Plus, I had trouble believing that anyone sane would do this to a family with young children. This was harassment, not harassment. It started as some harmless prank, but we ended up calling the police. As you might expect, they couldn't do much. They suggested putting up some security cameras, but we didn't have the money for that. I told the cops we would, but on the inside I was really reluctant to do something so drastic. They left, and I guess I felt a little better, even though my wife was still extremely shaken up. My wife and I did everything we could to hide the situation from our kids. Say what you will, but we didn't want to scare them. Nothing happened the next day or the next. I speculated that the cops had scared whoever was there away, which did track on many levels, so we tried to forget about it, even though neither of us really felt comfortable. I assure myself that maybe my wife was right. Maybe it had just been a prank or something. That didn't do anything to calm my nerves, though. I was on edge, looking out the windows every time I passed by, half expecting to see the statue somewhere else. I hope no one ever has to experience the sensation of feeling unsafe in your own home. A few days passed without incident. I started thinking the nightmare was over, and for the first time in a while, the house was actually starting to feel like home. I could not have been more wrong. It was a weekend. I don't remember whether it was Saturday or Sunday, but it was definitely a weekend since my kids didn't have school. After some breakfast, I went outside to play in the yard with my kids, and that's when I saw it. Spray painted in big black letters on the back wall of our house were the words, "Go away." I nearly dropped my son when I saw it. Without thinking, I rushed my kids inside and told my wife to stay in the house with them. I don't know what came over me. I'm not that brave of a guy, but I started sprinting through the garden, screaming threats at whoever had vandalized my house. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I was looking for a fight. No one was anywhere in my yard, though. Eventually, I gave up looking. As I was walking back towards the house, the adrenaline in me turned to outright fear. This was serious. Someone had left a direct message meant to scare us. They could have meant us harm, and I knew the situation was only gonna. Things started to escalate from there. The police came again and took down another report, but without any leads. There wasn't much they could do. I insisted that they stay on the property in case those people came back, but they told me they didn't have enough evidence to waste resources like that. As far as they knew, some teenage delinquents could have been behind the graffiti. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They told me they'd make sure a patrol officer was nearby, which I guess was some kind of consolation. My wife was twice as upset as I was, so I reassured her that we'd be okay, even though I was freaking out. Internally that night, I was in the kitchen when I heard my wife scream from the living room. I ran in and she was standing by the window, pointing outside. I looked and my stomach dropped. There were 5 people standing in our backyard, each of them wearing white face coverings. They were dancing around in this strange, jerky way, almost like puppets. We just stood there watching them, too shocked to move. It was terrifying. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, but it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. I snapped out of my haze and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife we had. I basically screamed at my wife to call the police, and while she was doing that, I ran out the back door with a knife in my hand. I screamed like a clinically insane person and took one step toward them before instantly regretting it. There were 5 of them and 1 of me. They could have been armed. Before anything else could happen, I turned and ran back inside the house like a coward. The knife must have scared them, though, because they stopped dancing and ran into the garden out of sight. I told my wife to run upstairs, find the kids and hide, and I guarded the back door in case they tried to break in. By the time the police arrived, those people were gone. The police did a thorough search but couldn't find any trace of them. That was the last straw. I didn't care about the cost. I bought and installed security cameras the next day. My wife was hysterical for weeks after that, begging me to let us move somewhere else. I told her that if one more thing happens, we would, but that we would probably be screwing ourselves financially if it came to that. Luckily, the cameras must have done the trick because those people never returned, and we never had another incident occur on the property. The scariest thing, though, is that we still live in the same house and never got an explanation for what happens. My wife Taylor and I recently moved out of our old home. She didn't like being so close to her family and wanted to put some distance between us and them. So that's what we did. We don't have kids, and she stopped working ages ago. So she was relatively amenable to my suggestions about where to move. I'm an electrician, so bouncing around isn't much of a problem for me. We eventually settled on New Mexico. We've both been rural people all our lives, so it wasn't that drastic of a lifestyle change. That was about 3 months ago, give or take. We found a fantastic deal on a place way out in the country. The house is honestly bigger than we really need, especially since it's just the two of us and our black lab Lola. But honestly, we figured we'd make use out of the extra space, maybe even host some of the friends we'd make. We'd been settled in for a few months when I started noticing something odd. The upstairs lights kept tripping circuits, but the rest of the house would still have power. After this happened once or twice, I knew exactly what the problem was. Like I said, I'm literally an electrician, so this kind of stuff is my bread and butter. I figured it would be an easy fix, just a matter of rearranging some of the load on the breaker, which in all likelihood was downstairs. Times like those make me happy that I'm the type of guy who knows how to fix things to be honest. I hadn't spent that much time in the basement since we moved in. I didn't really have a reason to. We'd looked it over briefly when the realtor showed us the place, but I didn't pay much attention. Come to think of it, I don't think I'd been in there one time since then. Anyway, I walked down the stairs and started looking around for the main breaker. The basement was pretty cluttered and definitely not the type of space that could be easily used. It looked more like a storage room than a basement. Eventually, I figured out where the main was and started fussing around. After about 10 minutes, I realized where the load imbalance was and told myself I'd rewire it when I had more time. At that point, I was about to go upstairs when curiosity got the better of me. I figured since I was down in the basement already, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have a look around. After all, this is my house. It was honestly a little strange that I didn't know every square inch of it. Like I said, most of it was filled with old furniture and a bunch of junk. There wasn't anything particularly interesting down there, and I eventually concluded that trying to transform it into a usable space would be way too much of a hassle. That's when I noticed something odd in the far corner of the basement. Behind this stack of old wooden chairs was a large metal door. It was strange because this wasn't just any door, it looked industrial grade. It was also a lot taller than most normal doors would be and seemed pretty thick too. I walked over to it and my suspicions were confirmed. It looked like the type of door you'd see securing a walk-in safe or some kind of panic room. My first thought was maybe it was a